Welcome back to the channel where history isn't just facts and dates, but the strange, the forgotten, and the downright disturbing. If you're new here, hit subscribe because the stories we tell aren't the ones they teach in school. Today we're going deep into one of the most extreme religious rituals ever practiced. A ceremony so intense, so horrifying, that even the Spanish conquerors were shocked into silence. What would make someone wear a rotting human skin for 20 days straight? The answer lies in the heart of the Aztec Empire, and it's darker than you think. Let's begin. The sacred drums echo loudly, bouncing off the stone walls of Tenochtitlan's temples. From the shadows, a priest slowly appears. At first, his body seems wrapped in loose, yellowing cloth, but as he moves into the torchlight, a chilling truth is revealed. He's not wearing fabric at all. It's human skin. And according to disturbing ancient records, these weren't just any skins. They were the flayed remains of children worn continuously for 20 days. This was part of one of history's darkest rituals. But what if I told you we've misunderstood the whole story for more than 500 years? Because the truth, the real truth, is even worse than the myth. What I'm about to share will forever change the way you see the Aztecs' most terrifying god and the priests who wore death like sacred clothing. In the next few minutes, you'll uncover what really happened during those 20 horrific days. You'll learn why mothers willingly brought their children to touch these rotting human skins. And you'll hear about a shocking archaeological find in 2019 that finally proved these rituals weren't just Spanish lies. They were real, and they were horrifying. But here's the twist. This entire story about children's skin might actually be the biggest historical lie ever told about the Aztecs. Before we dive deeper into this nightmare, if you're someone who loves uncovering the darkest corners of history that no one else dares to discuss, make sure to subscribe right now. Because this story will challenge everything you thought you knew. Picture this. It's March, the year 1519. The Spanish conquest hasn't happened yet. In the center of Tenochtitlan, the largest and most powerful city in the Americas, a terrifying ritual is about to begin. It's the start of the second Aztec month, Tlacaxipehualiztli, a word that literally means the flaying of men. For the next 20 days, the city will turn into a stage of sacred horror. But the preparations began even earlier, 40 days before. Captured warriors, and we'll soon explain exactly who they were chosen from wooden cages, where they had been imprisoned since their defeat. These weren't random choices. The priests handpicked each captive carefully. They were to become Ixipla, living symbols of the god Saipe Totec. That name alone should send shivers down your spine. It means, our Lord, the Flayed One. These men were not killed right away. For 40 days, they were bathed, blessed, and purified. They wore elaborate costumes, ate the finest foods, and were even paraded around the city as if they were nobility. But this wasn't mercy. It was psychological torture. They were celebrated, but only as a prelude to the most horrifying death imaginable. And here's where the nightmare truly begins. On the first day of Tlacaxipehualiztli, the chosen captives were brought to the center of the city. There stood a massive circular platform called the Temalacatl. This next part was recorded by Bernardino de Sahagún, a Spanish friar who gathered testimony from Aztec elders. And his account is truly chilling. The captive was tied to the platform with a rope just long enough to move. He was given weapons, but they were fake. Instead of razor-sharp obsidian blades, he received feathered wooden clubs. Then came his opponents, 4 of the Aztec Empire's fiercest warriors, the Eagle Knights and the Jaguar Knights, fully armed and ready to strike. Thousands gathered to watch. This wasn't a hidden ceremony. It was a public event as grand and brutal as a Roman Colosseum. The captive fought for his life, knowing failure meant more than death. Some were so brave that the crowd cheered for them. One story tells of a warrior who managed to wound 2 Eagle Knights before finally being overcome. His courage was honored, but his fate remained the same. When the captive fell, and they always did, the real horror began. But before we reveal that, there's one detail you absolutely must remember. Every single account, every codex, every Spanish record describes these victims as adult warriors, not children. That's important because it changes everything. The fallen warrior was then dragged up the steps of the temple. At the top stood a sacrificial stone, one you can still visit today in Mexico City. There he was stretched out on his back. 4 priests held his limbs down. A 5th priest, the high priest, lifted an obsidian knife above his chest. With practiced hands, he carefully cut beneath the ribcage. Then he reached deep inside the chest and pulled out the heart while it was still beating. He raised it toward the sky, offering it to the god of the sun. But that wasn't the end. That was only the beginning. Even the battle-hardened Spanish conquistadors' men, used to blood and war, felt sick at what came next. They wrote in their journals saying they became physically ill. After the sacrifice, the body was handed over to experts. And yes, they had actual experts for this. They were called Tlacaxipehualiztli, meaning the flayers. Their job was to remove the victim's skin, but not in pieces, in one perfect whole. It was like peeling off a wetsuit, but with horrifying precision. They began at the back of the head, making deep, careful cuts. They sliced down the spine, along the arms, and down the legs. They used obsidian blades sharper than modern surgical tools. They separated the skin from the muscle slowly and methodically. Their goal was to keep everything intact: the face, the hands, the feet. And they were fast. Some reports say they finished in just 20 minutes. One ancient drawing from the Codex Magliabechiano shows it in full detail. You can see the priest cutting the skin, peeling the flesh underneath exposed. But there's something worth noting. These victims were always shown as adult warriors, never children. When the skin was removed, it was handed to a priest or a young warrior. And then came the most disturbing part. They wore it. Yes, they literally dressed in the skin of the person who had just been killed. The dead hands hung from their arms. The dead face covered their own like a mask. Diego Duran, a Spanish friar, wrote about seeing this with his own eyes. He described how the priest wore the skin with lips and eye holes swinging loosely. Imagine the weight of it. The warmth, slowly fading blood still dripping. But they didn't wear it for just one ceremony. They wore it for 20 straight days. 20 days inside rotting skin, without washing, without removing it. They slept in it, ate in it, prayed in it. By day 3, the skin changed color pink, then yellow, then gray. By day 5, the smell grew strong. By day 10, it became unbearable. Spanish witnesses said the stench made people throw up from just being nearby. And still, these skin wearers didn't hide. They proudly marched through the streets. They went door to door, asking for food and offerings in the name of their god. Now picture this. You hear a knock on your door. You open it, and there stands a man wearing human skin. His face is covered in someone else's flesh. The dead lips droop. Maggots might already be crawling. You have no choice but to welcome him. You give him your best food and drink. Some people even paid them to leave faster. That's how deep the fear ran. For 20 days, the entire city lived under this religious terror. But here's where things get even darker, and where historians still argue today. Remember how people thought the Aztecs used children's skin? That's likely a misunderstanding. But the truth might be even more haunting. See, the Aztecs believed these flayed skins had healing powers. Mothers with sick children would search for these walking horrors. They brought babies with infections, kids with skin problems or blindness, and they had them touch the rotting flesh. They believed it could heal them. Spanish friars said they saw it happen over and over during those 20 days. One mother in Sahagun's writing said her blind son gained sight after touching the skin. Whether it was a miracle or a placebo, people believed it, and so the practice lived on. These skin wearers didn't just beg. They also fought mock battles in the streets. They faced young warriors not to kill, but to perform sacred rituals. It was deadly theater, a mix of horror, faith, and tradition. The Zapim would run through the city, chasing people while shaking their ceremonial staffs. These staffs were called Tlacaxipehualiztli, and they made loud rattling sounds with every step. The flayed skins on their bodies flapped in the wind, making the horror feel even more real. Children screamed and ran, terrified by what they saw. Adults stood frozen in their doorways, torn between deep religious duty and raw human fear. But what came next will completely change how you see this story. In 2019, something shocking happened. Archaeologists in Puebla, Mexico, made a huge discovery. They found the first confirmed temple built for the god Tzipetotec. This wasn't a drawing or secondhand account. It was a real physical temple still standing. And what they uncovered there was more terrifying than anyone expected. They found carved statues of Tzipetotec wearing detailed human skin with extra hands hanging from the wrists. There were round altars with special grooves designed to let blood flow away. But most shocking of all, they found deep pits beneath the temple floor. These pits weren't empty. They still held traces of organic matter. The lead archaeologist, Noemi Castillo, believed these pits were used to store the skins after the rituals. After 20 days of wearing rotting flesh, the priests would remove it carefully, piece by piece. The decaying skins were placed inside the pits, still treated as sacred even in that state. Some historical sources claim the skins were stored in large sealed jars made of ceramic. The lids were tight-fitting, maybe to trap the awful smell, because even the Aztecs, famous for enduring blood and death, couldn't take that stench anymore. But this discovery revealed something else, something that finally ends a long-standing myth. For years, people believed that Aztec priests wore the skins of children. But at this actual temple of Tzipetotec, no child remains were found, not even one. No small bones, no child-sized pits, no carvings showing the skins of children. All the evidence points to adult victims, always adult males. So where did this story about child skins come from? The answer is both simple and disturbing. It turns out the truth got twisted over time like a long, dark game of telephone. In some Spanish reports, there are mentions of women and children being sacrificed. And that part is true during the festival called Tlacaxipehualiztli. All war captives were killed. That included men, and sometimes captured women or children from enemy tribes. But here's what people miss. Only the male warriors were flayed. The rest, women and children, were sacrificed, but their bodies were not skinned. So why the confusion? It seems to come from a single sentence in the Florentine Codex. It reads, "All the captives died, men, women, and children." Later historians, either through bad translations or by trying to shock readers, mixed it all up. They saw that priests wore skins during the festival. They read about children being sacrificed. Then they made the leap, assuming priests were wearing children's skins too. It's not what the Aztecs did, but it made the story even more horrifying for European readers. There's another reason this myth stuck. The Spanish had a reason to make Aztec religion look even worse. By exaggerating their rituals, they made it easier to justify wiping out Aztec culture. They wanted people back home to think these people are monsters. We had to conquer them. Wearing the skin of a warrior was horrifying enough. But for propaganda, it wasn't horrifying enough. So they added children to the story, turning it from horror into pure nightmare. But let's be clear. The truth is already disturbing beyond belief. Just imagine what day 15 of the festival looked like. We're now more than 2 weeks into wearing rotting human skin. The Mexican sun has been relentless. The skins have turned black in some places, green in others. Chunks of flesh are falling off. The edges rot and tear with every movement. Flies never leave. They swarm the priests, constantly buzzing in clouds. The smell is unbearable. It's been described as a mix of meat left in the sun and sewage. And yet the priests continue. They go on with the ceremonies without pause. They still visit homes, still dance in city squares, still chant prayers in the temples. One Spanish eyewitness described a moment that stayed with him forever. He saw a flap of skin fall off a priest's arm during a ritual. It hit the ground with a wet, sickening slap. The priest didn't stop. He didn't even flinch. He just kept going as if nothing had happened. For the people of Tenochtitlan, this wasn't just ritual, it was part of life. Year after year, they watched death walk among them. Not just symbols of death, not stories or myths, but real rotting flesh. Children saw it every single year. They grew up with it burned into their memories. And even though they feared it, they also believed it was sacred. That's the paradox of this ritual, equal parts horror and holiness. To them, this yearly ritual was as normal as our modern holidays. But instead of cheerful lights or Santa Claus, they had priests wrapped in decaying human skin. By the 18th or 19th day, the skins had degraded beyond recognition. Some were so fragile they tore if the priests moved too fast. So they walked slowly and stiffly, carefully keeping the sacred skins intact. The dangling hands turned black and shriveled, swinging like dark ribbons in the breeze. The face masks barely held together, clinging on with dry blood and rotten flesh. Then came the 20th day, the end. But the ritual didn't just stop. It ended with one final public ceremony held at the temple of the flayed god. In front of the entire city, the priests removed their decaying garments. This wasn't a simple removal. After 20 days, the skins stuck to their flesh. Peeling them off was painful, like tearing death away from the living. Yet the skins were treated with care, not tossed aside like trash. They were gently folded. Imagine that folding skin after weeks of rot. Then sealed in sacred clay jars and stored beneath the temple in special chambers. Those skins had served their purpose, transforming men into living symbols of the god. The priests began cleansing rituals, desperate to scrub away the rot. They bathed again and again, rubbing their skin raw with sacred herbs. They fasted for days, drinking only blessed water. Many suffered infections and sores, but these were seen as holy wounds. Now you may ask, why endure all this? Why choose to live as death for 20 days? To answer that, you must understand their universe. To the Aztecs, Ziptok was not just death. He was death that gave life. In their myths, he flayed himself willingly to feed humanity with new life. Corn, their sacred crop, was seen as his gift through sacrifice. A kernel must rot in the ground before new life can sprout from it. So the rotting skin was a symbol, a living metaphor for rebirth through decay. When the priest removed the skin, it was like the seed breaking through the soil. They didn't do this for gore or fear. They did it to keep the universe in balance. Without it, they believed the sun might never rise again. These rituals were cosmic survival, not meaningless horror. Now think back to those mothers who brought their sick children to the priests. They weren't simply desperate. They believed in the power of the rot. The decay represented transformation, a place where miracles could occur. And there's something fascinating here, a strange link to early medicine. Modern researchers believe there may have been truth behind it. Certain bacteria, in small doses, can stimulate a stronger immune system. It's possible, just possible, that some children grew stronger from exposure. Others, of course, may have died, but those deaths weren't seen as failures. The priests themselves lived in tension, feared and revered at the same time. People bowed to them in awe, but tried not to breathe in their scent. They were honored guests at meals, yet no one wanted them to linger. They were walking paradoxes, living death and sacred life in one body. One powerful account comes from 1524, just 3 years after the Spanish arrived. A Spanish priest wrote of meeting an Aztec elder who had worn the skins 15 times. That's 300 days of rotting flesh draped over his body. When asked how he endured it, the old man said something unforgettable. "You Christians wear your God on a cross. We wear our God as a skin. Both require suffering." That may sound shocking, but it reveals something deep. To the Aztecs, the suffering was sacred, not cruelty, but devotion. It was their way of honoring life by walking through death itself. The priest wearing that decaying skin wasn't just putting on a costume. He was going through a powerful spiritual journey, like death followed by rebirth. This festival also had a strong political meaning that we're only starting to uncover. The early gladiator fights weren't random or just for show. Often, the ones being sacrificed were enemy leaders or brave warriors from recent wars. By defeating and skinning these warriors in public, the Aztecs were sending a warning. They were showing other cities, this is what happens if you fight us. But it wasn't just about scaring enemies, it had deeper meaning. When a priest wore the skin of a conquered enemy, it symbolized power transfer. The defeated warrior's strength was believed to pass into the city itself. That power became part of the god, and then part of the empire's strength. It was more than warfare. It was spiritual domination. And the festival also had a massive impact on the economy. For 20 days, normal life in the capital city changed completely. Markets were rearranged with special spots just for the offerings. Craftsmen got busy making items for the rituals. They built ceramic jars for storing the skins, carved new obsidian knives, and made detailed costumes. The entire city's economy revolved around this yearly event of death and renewal. Now here's something most people don't know, though it's in many sources. Not everyone who wore the skin was a priest. Sometimes, young warriors volunteered for this painful role. Usually, they had made a promise to the god if they'd been helped in battle or healed. So they offered to wear the skin at the next festival. Imagine being a teenager and knowing next year you'll wear a dead man's skin for 20 days. These volunteers went through months of preparation. They fasted, went through cleansing rituals, and trained their minds. Older priests taught them how to survive the ordeal. They were given prayers to repeat when the smell got too strong. They learned ways to meditate and mentally escape the horror. It was like going through a brutal spiritual training camp. But the process of selecting the skin donors was also strict. They didn't just flay anyone they chose carefully. The victim had to be a brave warrior, known for his courage. His body had to be whole without missing limbs or deep scars. They needed someone between 20 and 40 years old, grown but still strong. Children were never chosen for this, putting another hole in the myth of using child skins. But here's where things get even more intense. The warriors who captured those men had a special role in the ceremony. They were considered the fathers of the captured warriors. Because of that, they weren't allowed to take part in the flaying. Doing so would be like killing their own son. But they had to be there watching every moment of it. Once the skin was removed, they were given the body to take home. There it was, prepared and eaten in a sacred meal. Yes, it was actually cooked into a stew. They called it tlacaxipehualiztli, and it was mixed with corn and hot peppers. The warrior who captured the victim would share this meal with family and friends. They believed they were taking in the bravery and strength of the one they had beaten. Now, before calling it cruel, think about this comparison. When the Aztecs heard about Christian communion, they were shocked. They couldn't believe people claimed to eat the real body and blood of their god. Many were disgusted by the idea. To them, eating a human warrior in full ritual was more honest. They thought pretending bread was flesh was stranger than what they did. And what about the role of children in all this? When you look at it closely, their role was much more specific. Besides being brought for healing, noble children had to attend the gladiator sacrifices. It was part of their training, teaching them bravery and duty. They stood on special platforms, close enough to see but kept safe. Some boys chosen to be warriors later on had small parts in the rituals. They might carry sacred tools, help with setting up the altars, or help clean afterward. They were never the victims. The flaying never touched them. Archaeological evidence is clear. Most bones found belong to adult males. As Christianity spread through conquest, the ritual became a battleground of beliefs. Spanish priests saw the skin wearing as a direct insult to God's image. They outlawed it immediately, declaring it punishable by death. But the ritual didn't vanish. It simply went into hiding. In the 1530s and 1540s, secret gatherings still carried it on. Some used animal skins instead. Others crafted flayed skin costumes. In Mexico's remote regions, traces lasted for centuries. Anthropologists in the 1900s found rituals imitating the ancient rite. Participants wore yellowed leather, designed to resemble peeled flesh. The memory of the ritual endured long after the empire fell. Its psychological impact was massive. Every citizen of Tenochtitlan saw it. They grew up with the smell. The decay was part of life. Death wasn't hidden or distant. It walked the streets with them. It knocked on doors and stood beside them in prayer. This constant exposure shaped beliefs. The Aztecs didn't fear death. They wore it. They honored it. When priests donned human skin, they made death visible and intimate. To them, death wasn't an end. It was a change of form, a transformation, not destruction, a threshold, not a void. But let's not ignore the horror. The nightmarish truth still lingers. Even with deep spiritual meaning, the act was meant to shock. Aztecs didn't sanitize mortality. They faced it without filters. Tlacaxipehualiztli's power came from fear. He turned death into strength. Wearing the skin wasn't just tradition. It was total spiritual immersion. The priest became the god. He lived the myth of flaying. Modern psychology offers insight. These rituals changed mental states. Rotting flesh, sensory overwhelm, created visions and altered minds. Priests entered trances of insight. They claimed messages from the god. Visions weren't seen as madness. They were sacred, meaningful, divine. What they saw shaped decisions. War's harvests and fates turned on it. The more pain they endured, the more truth they believed was revealed. Now get ready for the part that may shock you the most. At the end of the 20 days, when the skins were finally removed and stored, the priests were treated like returning war heroes. They received new names, were honored with grand feasts, and given rare privileges. For young warriors who had taken part in this gruesome task, became a major stepping stone in their military careers. It was considered an extreme but powerful way to prove loyalty and courage. However, not all of them made it through. Some historical records mention priests who died during the 20 days. These deaths were likely caused by infections or diseases from the decaying flesh. Yet even these losses were not seen as tragedies. People believed they had been chosen to join their god Ziptopek forever. Their funerals were elaborate, and their names recorded in sacred temple scrolls. But why exactly 20 days? Why not more or less? The number wasn't random. It held deep meaning in their world. In Mesoamerican culture, 20 symbolized a full completed cycle. The Aztec calendar month had 20 days. Their number system was built on 20s. And they believed the human body had 20 digits, fingers, and toes for a divine reason. So wearing the skin for 20 days meant completing a sacred cycle of death and rebirth. Archaeological studies support this idea. The number 20 often shows up in their sacred symbols and carvings. Temple steps were grouped in sets of 20. Ritual tools were arranged in clusters of 20. Even the obsidian knives used for skinning were kept in boxes of 20. This shows the ritual's timing wasn't just tradition, it was part of their cosmic order. Now, as we come to the end of this dark and intense journey, we should pause to ask, why does this matter now? Not because we should judge the Aztecs from our modern view. They lived in a world that operated by very different beliefs and values. But understanding extreme religious practices helps us explore the power of belief itself. Those priests who wore human skins weren't mad or cruel. They were men who believed so deeply in their duties that they would suffer through horror to protect the balance of life. That level of commitment, even when tied to beliefs we find shocking, says something important about human nature. Also, let's clear up a dangerous myth: the idea that they wore children's skins. That story isn't just false, it's harmful. It shows how history gets twisted when rumors are repeated often enough. The real story is already disturbing enough. Adult warriors were sacrificed, and their skins were worn for 20 days. Adding false details only takes away from the serious reality. So the next time you hear someone claim they use children's skins, you can speak the truth. Not to excuse the practice, but to honor historical accuracy. Because the true account of Ziptepec and his terrifying festival needs no exaggeration. The Spanish conquest eventually put an end to this ritual, but its memory has not been erased. In Mexican museums, stone statues still show priests wearing carved skins. In ancient manuscripts held in European libraries, the flayed god still walks his eternal 20-day path. And modern excavations continue to uncover new signs of these rituals. This festival was possibly the most intense expression of religious devotion in any major civilization. For 20 days each year, they made death into something visible, something you could wear. They turned humanity's deepest fear into a sacred symbol. And whether we find that horrifying or strangely awe-inspiring, its impact is undeniable. The story of Tlacaxipehualiztli reminds us of something chilling and powerful. Human beings can endure anything if they believe it's necessary. Those priests believed they were saving the world. They thought every moment of suffering, every breath surrounded by rot, every frightened face in the crowd was worth it, because it meant the sun would rise and the crops would grow. That is the true terror and the true wonder of this ritual. Not just that they wore human skin, but that they believed doing so kept the universe alive. And it leaves us with one haunting question. What beliefs do we follow today that future generations may not understand at all? As we close the chapter on this haunting tradition, remember, history isn't just about dates or rituals. It's about understanding what people believed, feared, and were willing to die for. If this story gave you a new perspective, or made you think differently about the past, then help us keep these stories alive. Hit the like button, share this video with someone who loves dark history, and subscribe so you don't miss the next journey into the forgotten corners of our world. Because the truth, no matter how terrifying, deserves to be remembered. And trust me, the next story might be even stranger.